I pretended to be bankrupt during my divorce, then bought a mansion the day the papers were signed. The whole thing started when I caught my wife rummaging through my home office at 3 in the morning, photographing documents with her phone. She claimed she was looking for aspirin, but the stack of financial papers in her hands told a different story. That moment, standing there in my pajamas watching her scramble to put everything back, I realized our marriage had become a business transaction, and I was about to get cleaned out. My attorney warned me that she'd hired one of the most aggressive divorce lawyers in the state, someone known for squeezing every penny out of wealthy husbands. The writing was on the wall when she started asking detailed questions about my investments, my business partnerships, even my grandmother's antique jewelry collection. She'd transformed from the woman who used to bring me coffee in bed to someone calculating the value of everything I owned. The depression hit me like a freight train during those first few weeks after she filed. I'd wake up at dawn, stare at the ceiling, and wonder how 15 years of marriage had crumbled into spreadsheets and asset valuations. My buddies kept telling me to fight back, to hire an even nastier lawyer, but something about the whole legal warfare approach made my stomach turn. I needed a different strategy, something that would level the playing field without destroying what little dignity I had left. That's when I remembered my grandfather's stories about the Great Depression, how ordinary people had to get creative to survive when the system worked against them. He used to tell me about families who'd hide their valuables, create fake debts, and make themselves appear poorer than they were to avoid losing everything. The idea seemed crazy at first, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I started by liquidating my obvious assets quietly, converting stocks and bonds into cash through small, untraceable transactions. Every week, I'd withdraw modest amounts from different accounts, never enough to trigger any automatic reporting systems. The money went into a safety deposit box registered under my business name, which had been dormant for years. My wife's lawyer would see the account activity, but it would look like I was hemorrhaging money, not hiding it. The hardest part was selling my prized possession, a restored vintage motorcycle that had taken me 3 years to rebuild. I'd spent countless weekends in the garage, replacing every bolt and wire, turning a rust bucket into something beautiful. Letting it go to a collector in another state felt like cutting off a limb, but I needed the transaction to look legitimate. The buyer paid cash, and that money disappeared into my hidden stash along with everything else. Next came the fake debts, and this required some serious creativity. I had a college buddy who ran a small construction company, and he agreed to help me create a paper trail showing I'd borrowed substantial amounts for a failed renovation project. We backdated invoices, created email chains about cost overruns, and even took photos of deliberately sloppy work around my house. To anyone investigating, it would look like I'd thrown good money after bad trying to fix a disaster. My business partner agreed to play along with another deception, showing that our company had taken massive losses on a real estate deal that never actually happened. We created fake contracts, forged inspection reports, and even staged photos of a property that was supposedly worthless due to environmental issues. The paper trail was so convincing that I almost believed it myself. The most difficult aspect was maintaining the performance day after day. I had to act genuinely stressed about money, complaining about bills, skipping social events I couldn't afford, and even asking friends for small loans. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting on a small fortune while arguing with my wife about the grocery budget. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if I'd lost my mind, but then I'd remember those photos she'd taken of my documents, and the anger would fuel my determination. My wife's lawyer demanded forensic accounting, which I'd expected. The accountant they hired was thorough, but he could only work with the information available, and my fictional financial disaster painted a picture of someone who'd made terrible decisions and lost everything. The beauty of the deception was that it didn't require lying about non-existent assets, just creating believable reasons why real assets had disappeared. The psychological toll was heavier than I'd anticipated. Pretending to be broke while actually having substantial wealth created a weird kind of cognitive dissonance. I'd catch myself automatically reaching for my wallet to pay for dinner, then remember I was supposed to be counting pennies. Friends started treating me differently, some offering help with genuine kindness, others pulling away as if poverty might be contagious. The breakthrough came when my wife's lawyer made an unexpected move, demanding I provide documentation for every financial transaction from the past 5 years. Instead of panicking, I saw this as an opportunity to cement my deception. I spent 2 weeks creating a comprehensive story of financial decline, complete with medical bills for fake procedures, receipts for non-existent business expenses, and even a fabricated gambling addiction complete with casino visits and losses. The gambling angle was particularly effective because it explained away large cash withdrawals and created a narrative of self-destructive behavior that fit with her version of events. I researched problem gambling extensively, learning the terminology, the patterns, and the psychological profile. When her lawyer questioned me about specific transactions, I could provide detailed explanations that sounded genuinely remorseful and embarrassed. Meanwhile, I was secretly house hunting, looking for the perfect property to purchase immediately after the divorce was finalized. I found an incredible mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, complete with a home theater, wine cellar, and the kind of garage where I could rebuild a dozen motorcycles. The seller was motivated, having already relocated for work, and was willing to hold the property for a quick cash sale. The negotiations with the seller were tricky, because I had to arrange everything without leaving a paper trail that might surface during the divorce proceedings. I used a series of intermediaries, including a real estate investment company that specialized in discrete transactions. The purchase contract was structured with multiple contingencies and escape clauses, allowing me to walk away if my divorce strategy failed. My wife became increasingly frustrated as the months dragged on, and her lawyer's investigation kept revealing more bad news about my financial situation. She'd expected to walk away with half of a substantial estate, but the numbers kept getting worse. I could see the disappointment in her eyes during our court appearances, the gradual realization that she might be divorcing someone who was genuinely broke. The court hearings were exercises in performance art, with me playing the role of a defeated man who'd lost everything through poor judgment and bad luck. I dressed in increasingly shabby clothes, drove an old car I'd bought for cash, and generally looked like someone who'd fallen on hard times. The judge seemed sympathetic, even suggesting mediation to help us reach a settlement that wouldn't leave either of us completely destitute. Her lawyer's final gambit was demanding I take a lie detector test about my financial disclosures. I agreed immediately, knowing that polygraph tests aren't admissible in court and that someone truly desperate wouldn't hesitate to prove their honesty. The test itself was nerve-wracking, but I'd been living the lie for so long that it felt like the truth. When the results came back inconclusive, her lawyer's confidence visibly deflated. The settlement negotiations were surreal, with both sides arguing over debts rather than assets. Her lawyer tried to saddle me with responsibility for the fake construction loans and business losses, while my attorney pushed back, claiming I was already underwater financially. We eventually agreed on a minimal settlement, essentially splitting nothing, with her keeping the house and me walking away with my fabricated debts. The final court date arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in November. The judge reviewed our settlement agreement, asked the standard questions about coercion and understanding, and signed the papers that officially ended our marriage. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months, not because I was free from my wife, but because I was finally free from the deception I'd been living. I waited exactly 24 hours before making my move, wanting to ensure the divorce was completely processed and recorded. On Wednesday morning, I walked into the real estate office with a briefcase full of cash and signed the purchase agreement for the mansion. The closing was scheduled for the following week, but I arranged to rent the property immediately, moving my few possessions from the tiny apartment I'd been living in. The mansion was everything I'd dreamed of and more. The master bedroom was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. The kitchen was a chef's paradise, with professional-grade appliances and a breakfast nook that caught the morning sun perfectly. I spent the first night walking through empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the vast spaces, hardly believing I'd pulled off something so audacious. The garage was my favorite space, a climate-controlled temple to automotive excellence with enough room for 6 cars and a full workshop. I immediately started planning my next motorcycle restoration project, browsing online auctions for potential candidates. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to spend more on a hobby than my ex-wife had received in the entire divorce settlement. Word of my purchase spread quickly through our mutual friends and acquaintances. The reactions were fascinating to observe, ranging from confusion to admiration to outright anger. Some people figured out immediately that I'd been playing a long game, while others assumed I'd suddenly come into an inheritance or won the lottery. A few friends were genuinely upset that I'd deceived them, feeling like they'd been unwitting participants in my fraud. My ex-wife's reaction was the most dramatic. She showed up at the mansion 3 days after I'd moved in, pounding on the front door and demanding explanations. Through the security system, I could see her pacing back and forth, alternating between rage and disbelief. She'd brought her lawyer, who was frantically making phone calls, probably trying to determine if there were grounds to reopen the divorce case. The legal reality was that everything I'd done was technically legitimate. I hadn't hidden assets during the divorce proceedings. I'd simply repositioned them in ways that were difficult to trace. The fake debts were problematic, but since I'd never actually borrowed money or defrauded anyone, there was no criminal liability. Her lawyer eventually explained that while my actions were ethically questionable, they weren't grounds for overturning a final divorce decree. The months that followed were a strange mix of vindication and isolation. I'd proven that I could outsmart the system and protect what was mine, but the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. Several longtime friendships ended, with people unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with someone capable of such elaborate deception. My relationship with my own family became strained when they learned about the scheme, with my mother particularly disappointed in my methods. The psychological aftermath was complex. I felt proud of my strategic thinking and execution, but also guilty about the lies I'd told to people who tried to help me. There were nights when I'd sit in my beautiful new home, surrounded by luxury, and wonder if I'd become someone I didn't recognize. The victory felt hollow sometimes, tainted by the knowledge that I'd achieved it through deception rather than honest effort. My ex-wife eventually moved across the country, unable to handle the constant reminders of what she'd lost. I heard through mutual friends that she'd told everyone who'd listen about my deception, painting me as a sociopathic mastermind who'd manipulated the entire legal system. Some people believed her version of events, others thought she was just bitter about being outmaneuvered. The financial recovery took longer than expected. Converting my hidden assets back into legitimate investments required careful planning and professional help. I worked with a financial advisor who specialized in complex situations, gradually rebuilding my portfolio while maintaining the appearance of someone slowly recovering from bankruptcy. The process taught me valuable lessons about diversification and the importance of keeping some assets completely private. Dating again was complicated by my reputation. Word of the divorce scheme had spread through local social circles, creating a legend that was both attractive and terrifying to potential partners. Some women were intrigued by the audacity of what I'd done, while others saw it as a red flag indicating someone who couldn't be trusted. I learned to be upfront about my past, explaining the context and motivations while acknowledging the ethical gray areas. The mansion became both a symbol of my triumph and a prison of sorts. Every room reminded me of the deception that had made it possible, and I sometimes caught myself wondering if I truly deserved the luxury I'd fought so hard to protect. I started inviting friends over regularly, partly to enjoy the space and partly to normalize my new circumstances. The home theater became a popular gathering spot, where we'd watch movies and I'd tell edited versions of my divorce story. One unexpected consequence was the number of people who sought my advice for their own divorce situations. Men facing similar circumstances would reach out, asking for details about my strategy and whether similar tactics might work for them. I always discouraged these conversations, explaining that my situation had been unique and that the risks were enormous. The last thing I wanted was to be responsible for someone else's failed deception. The final twist came almost a year later, when I discovered that my ex-wife had been having an affair throughout the last 2 years of our marriage. The revelation came through a mutual friend who'd finally decided to tell me the truth, feeling guilty about keeping the secret. The affair explained her sudden interest in my finances and her determination to maximize the divorce settlement. She'd been planning her exit strategy while I was still trying to save our marriage. Learning about the affair retroactively justified every aspect of my deception. I'd been protecting myself from someone who'd already betrayed me, someone who'd been calculating the value of our shared life while pretending to love me. The anger I felt was different from the divorce rage, sharper and more focused. I'd been playing defense against an opponent who'd been playing offense for years. The knowledge also brought a sense of closure I hadn't expected. My elaborate scheme no longer felt like an overreaction to a failed marriage, but rather an appropriate response to a calculated betrayal. I'd instinctively known that I was fighting for my survival, even if I hadn't understood the full scope of the threat. The mansion around me felt less like a monument to deception and more like a fortress I'd built to protect myself from someone who'd been planning to destroy me. Looking back now, I realized that the divorce wasn't just about money or property. It was about power and control. My ex-wife had tried to use the legal system as a weapon, expecting me to be a passive victim who'd accept whatever settlement her lawyer could extract. By refusing to play that role, by taking control of my own narrative, I'd reclaimed power in a situation designed to leave me powerless. The experience taught me that sometimes the system is rigged against you, and your only choice is to change the rules of the game. I'd grown up believing that honesty and fair play would always win in the end, but divorce court had shown me that good people could be destroyed by those willing to use every advantage available. My deception had been a form of self-defense, not a predatory attack on someone innocent. Today, I still live in the mansion, though I've made it more of a home than a symbol. The garage houses 3 restored motorcycles now, each one representing a different phase of my recovery. I've learned to enjoy the space without constantly thinking about how I obtained it, and I've built new friendships with people who know the whole story and accept it as part of who I am. The relationship with my ex-wife has evolved into complete indifference, which feels healthier than the anger or resentment I used to carry. She's someone I used to know, someone who taught me important lessons about trust and self-protection. I don't wish her ills, but I don't think about her at all anymore. The mansion that once represented my victory over her now simply represents my home, my sanctuary, my fresh start.